So, I was up north in Shepherd, Michigan. I believe that that's the name, and it's a very small town, and this was about 3 summers ago, I think. I was visiting my best friend. We were really bored because her mum grounded her from her car, and there's not really anything to do out there, so we decided to walk to downtown. I think it was about 8 or 9 p.m, I'd say, as the sun was going down at this point. The walk there was pretty long. We had to cross some dirt roads and follow a railroad track. By the time that we got there, it was dark, and I had already wanted to go home because I don't like being outside in the country in the dark. It's just really creepy. But we sat at a park for a little bit on the swings. I noticed 2 sheriff police cars parked off at the end of the tiny strip that they call downtown, parked at this old car shop. According to my friend, they were most likely looking for 2 guys who had been car hopping a few nights before. We decided to start heading back because, well, we weren't even supposed to have left the house, and her mum was threatening to lock us out for the night. It was like 10 p.m. at this point, and I wasn't looking forward to the long walk through the cornfields and railroad tracks in the pitch-black night. So we were walking past the old car place, about to turn the corner, and I heard a loud helicopter. Apparently, to my friend, it's a police helicopter looking for the car hoppers. As a city girl, I highly doubted that and thought it was pretty ridiculous, but I also grew even more paranoid, hoping that they wouldn't mistake us for the criminals. But we're passing the sheriff car, and I'm trying to act so unsuspicious, even though we didn't do anything wrong, except walk the railroad tracks, I guess. But anyways, here's where things got a bit crazy. And this is by far the most bizarre thing that has ever happened to me. So we turn the corner, and behind this downtown strip is a large grassy field, and at the far end is a forest. At the edge of where this field meets the forest was this giant rod-like thing just suspended mid-air, not much higher than the trees. It's kind of hard to describe, but it was like 2 rods on top of each other. The top one extended a little bit more to the right and the bottom one to the left. At each end had very vibrant green lights, so 2 on each end and on the top and bottom. Maybe it was just because of how dark it was being in the country, but these lights didn't shine like normal to me. The colour was just super vibrant and warm and glowed more than shined. And it was giant, like the size of a bus or 2. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. We heard a helicopter pretty loud actually, but I didn't see it anywhere. Just this thing hanging in mid-air. My friend, not a UFO or alien believer, thinks it's some sort of police aircraft looking for the car hoppers, which was very hard for me to believe at this point because if this was any kind of aircraft of ours, it would be locked up in Area 51 for sure. And definitely not out looking for car hoppers off a tiny little town. It didn't look like a plane as well. It was a rod. It had no wings or propellers. It made no sense how this giant heavy-looking rod thing could just sit like that in mid-air. It was at a weird slant too, which I couldn't understand. I already had my phone out as a flashlight, and I held my phone up to get a picture of it. And that was when this thing went spiraling towards us. Yeah, it literally spun like a fan directly at us, and you could hear the wind cutting against it. I just froze, and my face was twisted in the most ugliest way. I was just so stunned and not understanding what the hell was happening. My friend pushed my hands down so my phone was no longer pointing at the thing, and as quickly as it had started spinning towards us, it stopped. It repositioned itself, raised up a little bit, and then just started moving the opposite way, to cross over downtown, I suppose. And the helicopter that we heard had finally appeared and was in front of the rod thing, as if it was guiding it away or something. It wasn't a regular-looking helicopter either, or maybe it was just my hysteria or shock that made it look distorted, but it looked much rounder. The windows were bigger and all the lights were on inside, but I couldn't see anyone in there. And all of this was happening right above our heads. My friend might have been in denial, but I knew that that wasn't from this world as soon as I saw it. And I could see the ship more clearly, and it had these intricate lines and designs on it too. Kind of like wires, but I'm not too sure. I don't remember it as clearly now, and it was really dark, but that definitely stood out to me. And the feeling of seeing something, of having something above you that isn't from us, it's a bit of a crazy feeling, let me tell you. Your brain is used to having a name for everything that we see, and once it can't recognize something as something from humans, it's just a very strange, overwhelming feeling, and Possibly a feeling that itself can't be registered or named yet. I'm not too sure. But yeah, we just slowly walked away, and I kept glancing back a few times, but I quickly stopped and just tried to get home as quickly as possible at this point. I always had wanted to get up and close and personal to a UFO. Life elsewhere is just so fascinating to me. I always wanted to see what they really look like. But after that, I must admit that I'm pretty terrified and will never chase down or even take a picture of a UFO if I ever see one that close again. I've seen a lot in my life, but that hands down was the scariest thing to ever happen to me, and I'd love to know if anyone else has seen something like that before as well. I've heard of the triangles, the bells, the saucers, cigars, and all sorts of stuff, but never what I've seen. If it was a secret military ship of some kind and they wanted to test it in a discreet area, why would they choose to test it right next to the only populated place in the town? Either way, there was definitely something more going on there than just some car hoppers. This happened maybe 2 years ago and is without a doubt the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. So me and my at the time roommate were just finished working out. It was about 8 PM and the sun had already gone down. After walking out of the gym, we decided to do a couple of laps at the nearby stadium before we go home. Nothing obscure happens on the way there, but once the stadium comes into view, we realize the floodlights are turned off. This didn't deter us, as we were pretty certain we could run in the dark either way. But we went to the bottom row of the seats to leave our gym bags there, and as we were placing our bags, we started hearing it. It was whistling coming from the top rows right above us. Not only was the very fact that someone was sitting in the dark the entire time unnerving, but the whistling itself was pretty bone-chilling. I don't know if I can explain it properly like this, but it was 3 low-pitched whistles, then a higher pitch, then 1 lower pitch, and then it would repeat. It sounded like whatever was making it wanted us to come to it. We were pretty unnerved, like I said, so we whispered to each other to grab the bags and then jog to the other side of the stadium and just get out. We took our bags and started jogging, and almost immediately afterwards, the whistling just stopped. As I could hear nothing else but our feet stomping on the ground and heavy breathing, I just figured that it had grown bored and just went away. But just then, I started hearing something. I could hear a third set of feet running behind us. My stomach dropped as I realized that whatever that was running towards us. Our adrenaline kicked in and we started booking it to the exit. As we were getting closer to the exit, I could hear it again, whistling, but this time about 10 feet away from me. We made it past the exit and out onto the street, and we didn't quit running until another block down. We stopped to catch our breaths, and whatever was chasing us had quit at the stadium exit. Only me and my roommate know about this story, and we've never really talked about it. But that whistling is the most disturbing thing that I've ever heard. When I was 12, I decided making a newspaper for my entire neighborhood was a really great idea. My friend and I, both avid fiction wannabe authors and generally just cringy middle-aged school nerds, decided to get together once a month and write absolutely enthralling articles about the weather or when the pool would be open, and then deliver our front-back one-page newsletter to every single house in our 2-street neighborhood, whether they wanted it or not as well. And we kept this up for about 2 years, until the time of this story. So, we were on our once-a-month paper route, if you could call walking around our small neighborhood and putting a single sheet of paper in every mailbox a paper route. It was raining this particular time, so we had umbrellas and were carefully walking to each mailbox, trying to keep our newsletter as dry as possible. This also meant that all the cars that came by had their headlights and windshield wipers on, and also made sufficient noise with their tires splashing through the puddles. But my point is that we knew when a car was approaching behind us. So we were about halfway through on a street that we weren't so familiar with, the one we didn't live on, when we noticed this souped-up old white car coming really slowly up the street. Now, the way my neighborhood was set up, the only reason why you would be on the same street as us is if you lived there or you made a wrong turn. So there were even less cars on this street, and the ones that passed usually were people that we knew. We continued walking from mailbox to mailbox while periodically checking to make sure the white car wasn't just parked. It was moving too, but so slowly, and the headlights and the windshield wipers were either broken or just not turned on. This car drove slowly past us as we walked, going roughly the same pace as our steps, if not slower. And something was definitely really off about everything. There was no reason for this car to be on this road in the first place. We definitely didn't recognize it or the driver inside, and it was going so incredibly slow. Car trouble? I don't know, but it was weird. We pretended one of the houses was ours, and we walked up the driveway to avoid the car as it got close to us. It continued at the same pace, and we watched it until it eventually disappeared around the corner. We just laughed about it, thinking that it was weird, but nothing happened. It was all well and good again until the car showed up at the end of the street behind us again, going just as slowly as it had before. What was this person doing? We were so confused and walked a little farther from the curb to avoid the car again as it came by. We didn't laugh about it this time though, because we both could sense that there was danger lurking. And the car showed up a third time at the end of the street too. And at this point, we decided that we should cut through some of the yards to just get home. Better safe than sorry, right? So, we crossed the street, but the car passed again, and we just shrugged it off and we just kept going. But the fourth time this car came around, it pulled right up next to us, and the driver had his window down. Being 12 and living in a bubble, my friend and I hadn't quite been exposed to the world of drugs and junkies, but we knew something was up with this guy. He had a white towel draped over half his head, was wearing a white tank top, while we were in long sleeves and rain jackets, had his windows down, and when he spoke, his speech was slurred. We were polite and we said hello, and he asked us what we were doing through his open window. We continued walking as this interaction took place because we knew this dude seemed sketchy, but at the same time we didn't want to assume anything and just be rude. When we told him that we ran a newspaper, he immediately perked up and enthusiastically asked about placing an ad. He also took his hands off the steering wheel and leaned over so that he could get closer to the window. And boy, did he smell of cigarettes. My friend and I looked at each other. We knew that something was wrong at this point. We told him no, we don't place ads in our newspaper, even though we did. Quite the entrepreneurs at 12, right? And then he told us that we were pretty girls and probably cold, right? Our idea to cut through some yards was decided. We hurriedly said something about needing to go home, and he began shouting at us from inside the car as we crossed the street. We bolted to a neighborhood's backyard when we heard the car begin to move quickly and hid in some bushes until we were sure the car was gone. And after that, we just stopped writing our newsletter. Meeting a creepy person while you're alone in the rain in your own neighborhood was a good deciding factor for just calling it quits. In the end, nothing happened, and I'm really glad for that, but it definitely could have gone very, very different. What happened has bothered my sister for just years. And my family has finally talked her into maybe going into therapy to talk about it because she still feels guilty about it. She wanted me to share it here just to get it out there and just to have it written down somewhere as well. So in 2013, my sister was 11 and she was friends with this girl who I'll call Becky. She wasn't her best friend, but she was really close to her. My sister had known Becky since junior school, and she would always come round to play out with my sister and her other friends, so we saw her all the time as well. I was 13 at the time, and because me and my sister are typical sisters, we used to terrorize each other. I would make fun of her in front of her friends, and she would do the same to me. Me and Becky, though, we got along really well, and she was honestly just so funny, and she was nice and friendly, and I used to joke all of the time that I wish I could swap my sister for her. And this is honestly how close we all were. We had a tight bond. So, there's these fields near our house which we would always play on. It's by the sea, so there's lots of sand hills and long grass. There's also a small hut with sports equipment in it. I mention this because police mentioned it a lot. I think that they thought that it was a potential hiding spot, but I'm not too sure. But anyway, my mum would always send me to go and get my sister when it was time for her to come home. Becky lived the opposite side of the field, so we would go one direction while she would go the other. This was pretty normal. Before you say that we should have walked her home, I know that we should have, but at the time we just never thought anything bad would ever happen. On that night, though, I'd gone to get my sister at 7 p.m, and when I got to the field, she headed back to me looking over the fields. I asked her where Becky was, and she said that she was on her way home. I couldn't see Becky anywhere, but at the time I didn't think anything of it, and my sister was acting normal, so we just went home. But then we got a phone call an hour later from Becky's parents asking us where she was. They knew that she'd been playing with my sister and assumed that she was still with her as she hadn't come home yet. My parents explained that she wasn't with us and she walked home an hour ago. My parents asked my sister when she last saw her, and she told them that she was walking home. And long story short, there was no sign of her at all. Her parents called around all of her friends, and they also said that she wasn't with them, and they began to flip out, and the police were soon called. The next day, her body was found by a dog walker, and she was still on a field behind one of the sandhills. She had been assaulted and strangled. It makes me sick because she was only 11 and she was the sweetest girl ever. It also really bothers me that she never left that field, which means that she was probably murdered close to the time that we were still there, as she never got too far. But the worst part, they never found out who murdered her. My sister says that they just sat and talked for the hour that they were in the field. There was no indication that anything bad was going to happen. No bad vibes, no suspicious conversations, nothing. She said that a man walked across the sandhill by himself for about 10 minutes, and he was a potential suspect for the police for a while, but I don't think anything ever came from it. My sister just remembers his clothes, but not his face, as he was quite high up on the hill. My sister still blames herself, and she wishes every day that she could just go back and walk her home. Just thinking about Becky makes me extremely emotional, and I'm actually tearing up while I'm writing this out. I just hope that Becky is safe in heaven and her murder will be solved one day. This happened while my parents were away when I was around 14. So, a friend of theirs was staying in our house at the time, caring for me while they were gone for what I think was about a 2-week period or so. The person staying with us, my brother and I, was sleeping in a smallish house thing that we have at the back of our place, per her choice, as we'd had rooms available for her to sleep in the house, so she wasn't able to hear anything or do anything about any situation that might happen in the actual house itself if it were to take place at night. Anyway, I was up late at night on a school night, I think around 11 or 12, on my phone after having read a book for a bit in bed. For context, my room is on the second floor of our place too. We have an alarm in our house, and normally I turn it on when I go to bed, but my older brother, about 25 at the time, had messaged me saying that he'd be back soon since he'd been working, so I decided I'd leave it off just to make things easier for him and so he could turn it on himself. While I was on my phone, I heard noises from downstairs, what I thought was banging, but I just dismissed it as one of my brother's friends, who my brother had mentioned might be coming around at some point, knocking on one of the doors. I stayed on my phone for a few minutes more and then put it to the side and tried to get some sleep. But then I heard more noise downstairs, and at that point I was wondering if maybe there was someone breaking into the house, but I just thought, nah, that's pretty unlikely. But I decided to sit up and continue to listen out for a bit just in case. Another noise, and this time louder, and I began to hear movement downstairs. I thought it was probably my older brother, who had just been making a bit more noise than usual because he was having a hard time opening the door with his key or something. But then I heard the downstairs hall door open, and someone began to move throughout the hall and then continued to make their way up the stairs. My bedroom was right next to the top of the stairs, so I could hear everything clearly as someone ran up. By then I thought, that's not my brother, and reached for my phone, ready just in case I needed to call the police. And then the door swung open and a tall man in a black hoodie stood in the doorway, his right side slightly behind the door, and made eye contact with me. I was completely frozen because it definitely was not my brother. In fact, I had no idea who this man was. I think he had noticed that my hand was on my phone and, thinking I'd called the police, sprinted downstairs and out of the house, making a lot of noise as he ran. For a moment I was in shock and had no idea what to do. At first I was calm, but then I called the woman who was staying with us on my phone, and I just broke down crying because I was terrified. She ended up coming into the house and comforting me in my room, sitting with me as she called the police. The police arrived later, and I tried to recall the details of the man, but when he had opened my door, I was freaking out internally, so all I could remember was the hoodie color. I later found out that he had broken in by jimmying open one of the downstairs windows with a crowbar, and as soon as I heard that, I realized that if I hadn't have had my hand on my phone, him thinking that I called the police, who knows, he may have actually beaten me to death. In 7th grade, I went with a few dozen classmates of mine on a tour of the East Coast. But one of the most greatly anticipated stops was Gettysburg, a town famous for its role in the American Civil War. Our tour guide took us to several battlefield sites. We had just gotten back in the seats of our icily air-conditioned coach bus when several things happened in just quick succession. I suddenly felt really hot. It was as if someone had turned a switch on the temperature. I asked the girl in the seat next to me if she had noticed the heat, and she told me that she was as cold as ever. I then felt pressure on my ear, and it honestly felt like someone was screaming just inches from me, but I couldn't really hear anything. I just felt that vibration and that pressure against my ear, and then I smelled something familiar and really unpleasant. Death. When I was 10 years old, my father decided that he wanted to come home to die. After years of visiting him in the hospital and after rounds of chemo, suddenly a large hospital bed took up most of the space in our living room. My sister and I would give him a kiss goodbye before running off to catch the school bus, and I'd wonder what that goodbye would mean an hour from now, and 2 hours even. I'm telling you all this not to depress you, but because it factors into my Gettysburg experience. You see, after my father died, my mother had the carpets in our house shampooed. And that was when I noticed what had been collecting in our house all those weeks. The smell of death. So when I tell you that I smelled an intense wave of death, I need you to understand that this was so much worse than the living room carpet at home. The air was just thick with it. And as quickly as the sensation had come to me, they just left. The screaming, the heat, and the stench were gone, and it may seem odd when I tell you that I still don't believe in ghosts, but perhaps knowing about my living room will help you understand what I mean when I say that I believe that sadness and pain and loss can hang onto walls like residual smoke or something. They stain carpets, they infect the land, and the land at the battle site was screaming under the weight of the dying in the merciless July heat. So I'm a male, and this happened when I was about 19 years old. I'm still not sure what to make of it, but I'm 26 now, and it's really not the initial experience itself that gave me the spooks. It's more about what happened after. So, I was in nursing school at this time. One night I woke up at around 3:30 in the morning. My TV was on as usual because I sleep better with it. I was laying on my back, and something just felt really off. I glanced to my right, and I saw something next to my bed. I saw a black figure, only from the shoulders up, like it was crouched down next to my bed, just watching me sleep. When I saw this, obviously I became anxious and tried to roll over, but I realized that I just couldn't move my body. I couldn't scream, and I couldn't do anything but watch it. The figure seemed to be hovering slowly back and forth along the side of my bed. This felt it went on for a lifetime, but it was only a few minutes because I could see my clock below my TV. Then eventually, the figure lowered itself below the edge of my bed until I just couldn't see it anymore. Once I lost sight of it, I immediately started getting a tingling sensation just all over my body, and I was able to move again. I was so terrified that I just scooted over towards the other side of my bed and stared at my TV until I fell back to sleep. And this is where it gets interesting. So, a few weeks later, one of my classmates, 35 and female, decided to open up to a few of us, stating that she basically was a medium. I have mixed feelings on this, so I wasn't quick to believe her until she started telling another classmate about her dead grandmother. None of us knew she was deceased, and she never told this woman either. And she also described an object that she often sees with her, and it turned out to be a necklace her grandmother gave her before she died. A few shocking reveals later, I decided to ask her about the thing that I saw next to my bed that night, and before I even got to explain anything, she asked if it was about the little girl. But this was odd because when I was in high school, I was woken up by my cat crying and I saw a little girl standing behind him. Anyway, I proceeded to explain to her about the situation that happened with the black figure next to my bed, and after I was done, she said, "You didn't look over the edge of the bed, did you?" I hadn't told her that, but I responded to her question with no, I didn't. She told me that if I ever saw it again, do not follow it, and you need to say the Lord's Prayer. After this, she told me that she had also seen a little boy with me before, and she said that he was no good, and she called him a little demon boy. At this time in my life, me and my friends were exploring old cemeteries, abandoned houses, general creepy places, and she stated that I could have picked him up doing these kinds of activities. This was on a Friday. The following Monday, I jokingly asked her, "You didn't see the little boy with me today, did you?" And she laughed and said, "No, but you've seen him before, right?" And this gave me chills. Of course, I asked her where I had seen him. And next, this woman looked into me, and I say that because when she looked into my eyes, she just stared into me like no one has ever done before. And after a few awkward seconds of this, she proceeded to tell me where I had seen him. This woman described the layout of my bedroom to me, told me that I saw him next to my closet. She literally described both the entries to my bedroom and the layout of the room, and then she told me that I saw him next to my closet. I hadn't told her this, but the closet was only about 2 feet apart from my bed, and that is the side of the bed that I saw the black figure. After explaining that to her, she told me that he disguised himself in front of me that night, and she said that if something presents itself in black to you, it's usually a demonic presence. And yes, that made me even more scared. After this, I cut back on the late-night graveyard and abandoned house searches. I haven't seen anything like that since, though I have had a few other occurrences happen. I've been having these kind of encounters since I was a child, though most were mild and I didn't feel afraid. But the figure next to my bed was the only moment that I truly feared for myself in regards to the paranormal. If I remember correctly, the year was 2011. My dad and sister and I lived in the same house as we do today, which is a 3-story house that we took over after my grandmother passed. Me and my sister both had our bedrooms on the highest floor, right by the attic, and the attic was where most of the activity came from at the time. Cliché, I know. We always heard weird noises coming from in there, and even my most skeptical friends told me that they felt just a very unpleasant feeling every time they walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor. And the unpleasant feeling got even stronger if you entered the attic. Now one day, I went into the attic to search for some old stuff that we had stored in there. As I'm looking around in the boxes and bags, I saw someone in the corner of my eye. My sister was slowly approaching me from behind, crouching, and I was sure that she was trying to scare me or something. So I just started talking to her, and she stopped, right behind me. I don't remember what I said to her, but I just didn't get a reply. So I said her name, and still no reply, and I said her name louder, and yes, I heard her respond. Although not from behind me, but from her bedroom. I was about to have a panic attack, and I still saw the figure in the corner of my eye crouching. I saw long, blonde, dirty hair, but couldn't make out a face quite, and I closed my eyes in fear before opening them again, and as I turned around, there was nobody there. I grabbed the bag that I was supposed to look through, and I just ran like hell straight out of that attic. My eyes feel hot and my throat is dry, and I was in my room not even 10 minutes ago, just watching some things on YouTube. I hear something move really quickly. I look over to my bookshelf, and the cup that I had there moved unrealistically fast, about 2 inches backwards. I was, at the time, very confused, as I just thought that it slid or something. But now this part, I will understand if no one believes me, as I doubt it even more, trust me. So I got up to use the restroom, and I heard 2 soft knocks and then 1 hard knock on my windows. Note too that the drapes were closed, so I couldn't actually see. I mustered up enough courage, though, and opened the drapes. And there, standing there, was a boy with ginger hair and pitch black eyes, and he quickly dropped away from my window as soon as I saw him. It was as if he fell off a ledge or something and just slid down, out of sight. I really don't understand it though, and I'm not sure how to describe it perfectly, but his eyes were a type of dark that a blind man sees, if that makes any sense. It's the best that I can describe it. But just as this kid disappeared, my ears started ringing really harshly, as if a grenade just went off by me. I ran into the living room where I'm now sharing this with you guys, and honestly, I've never believed in the paranormal, but now I kind of feel like I have to. I'm still cooling down right now, and I'm sweating. I have a dry-ass throat and my eyes feel hot and heavy, but I'm going to try and get some sleep now and see what happens. In 2002, my husband was deployed out of the country for 15 straight months, and I kept our housing unit occupied, on a military post in the Eastern Time Zone, halfway between Canada and Mexico, with our 2 children, 2 cats, and my 90-pound bulldog Mastiff mix. I worked at a large and privately owned wildlife rehab a day or 2 a week. This charity participated in a bingo charity nearby to raise funds, and it competed with another charity run by 2 people who claimed to be in witness protection for witnessing a murder up north. But they were sketchy people, to say the least. I met 2 people who were terrified after dealing with them, and they claimed ignorance as to why large dogs and cats disappeared in their care. During the 15-month separation, though, I decided that our oldest was ready to assume the responsibility of caring for the housing unit, with the help of our neighbour, while I left for a short period of time. He learned how to answer the phone, to lock the doors, how to call our bulldog to the main door should anyone cause any problems, and how to call our neighbour if anything should go amiss or awry, or if anyone got hurt or whatnot. And so too did our youngest. This being so, I asked our neighbour to be on call one night as I drove up to a super Walmart to get some groceries. She agreed, and I left in our 2-door tracker soft top. The Walmart that I went to was 15 miles away in a slightly larger city than the one nearest. Its main parking lot was really long, as the sides had no spots, and to its left was a Lowe's. So I parked about 15 spaces away from the store's front. I was much closer to the side road leading to the Lowe's than to the store itself. When I parked, there were a few cars by mine, and it was about dusk. When I came out about 25 minutes later, it was fully dark around this time, about 9:15 p.m, and my car was one of the only cars at the end of the parking lot. There was one car by mine, though, and it was a van. It was one of those windowless utility vans, like from the 70s, or at least the design has never been updated. It was a dull white, and the weird thing about the van was that it was parked ahead of my car, lest I would never have seen my car at all. You see, 2 door trackers are short. Even in a regularly parked manner, they're not visible from the bottom of a parking aisle, as most all other cars are longer than it. The van was the only car parked by mine at all, and it was parked almost in between the space next to mine and the space in front of itself. As I approached the back of my tracker, I was going to put the groceries in the back. I saw that the van was parked in such a way so that its sliding side door on the right side was adjacent to my driver's side door. It was also parked rather closely so that if I opened my driver's side door and someone slid open the van's side door, there's no way that I could run forward in between the 2. And this definitely gave me the willies. I remember very well putting plastic bags of Walmart crap into the back of the car and wondering just why someone would park like that. I mean, why? Here's the thing about stuff like this too. When a female or a young person or whatever sees something this freaky in real life, she might not get it at first. Unless she grew up in like Detroit or the west side of Cleveland, danger signs blink a little slower. And worse, we're told by our family that we're just imagining things when we report that we were scared about something. I had given birth to a child in a foreign country, ran cross-country in a place where boar hogs roamed, and taken care of many situations with crazy neighbours without a man before, hence the big dog. But I still stood there at the back of the tracker, trying to figure out why I was so unsettled. I think that we just don't think that the worst can happen, which is why when, or if it does, we might just freeze. It never occurs to us that we might really be in trouble. All this being so, I decide to listen to the idiot voice in my head, and I close the back of the tracker, and I walk over to the passenger side of the car. I unlocked it, tossed my purse into the back, and crawled over the stick shift as fast as I could, closing the door quickly behind me and hitting the lock. I then shoved the key into the ignition while slamming down the emergency brake, put the car into first, and gave it gas. I pulled away from the van, turned right, and sped away to the Lowe's portion of the parking lot, all without putting on my seatbelt or turning on the lights. But by the time I pulled another right around to face the same direction, the van was still there. I put on my seatbelt, and as I began to adjust myself, the van left. I drove home carefully, and when I got home, the kids were fine, and our dog was happy, and the neighbour said nothing amiss happened. And this might be the end of the story, you're thinking, but it definitely isn't. A few weeks later, I had to go to Walmart again, and the neighbour said that she also needed a thing or two, so I told her that we could barter. I bought her 2 things, and she kept an eye on my children. Again, I parked near the end of the parking lot. This time, however, I took our other car, a 4-door, hardtop, 5-speed tracker. We like the cars, sue me. I shopped quickly, and upon leaving the store and walking toward our car with the cart, I stopped dead in my tracks about 10 parking spaces out because a windowless, white utility van was parked near our car, but parked slightly forward again. I must have stood there for about 20 seconds trying to gather what was happening. I take this time to redress the concept of reality. I mean, what the hell is really happening? I can only remember certain things about that moment, and I know I turned my cart around. I know that I felt numb. I know that I felt like I was floating, not walking, and that I was floating too slowly to get back to the store for my liking. I remember that my teeth thudded in my head with every footstep, even though I was floating. And when I did get to the building, I walked up to the tallest person in a blue vest and cheerfully asked if he could walk me to my car. And I did not say, "Someone is trying to abduct me." In fact, I seem to remember thinking that that would discredit me. It all happened very quickly, so instead I asked nicely if I could have an escort to my car. He nudged his chin up in another person's direction and walked with me towards the doors. When we got outside, though, the white van was miraculously just gone. I figured it would be, but I must admit that it made me wonder if I imagined it. Anywho, I told him that I would really just appreciate if he watched me load the groceries and drive away. He was very nice, and he did just that. As I drove home, I watched for trailing cars, and there were none. Anyway, by then, 911 had occurred, sadly, and it was hard to get on the post without an ID. I called the police that night and told them about both incidences, and I didn't file a report, but I left my phone number and said that I would come in if anyone else experienced a white van issue. As I thought, I was not taken seriously. I take responsibility for not calling the police the first time, and after that I stopped working for the charity a while later. Up until my mid-20s, I would have told you that there's no such thing as ghosts. Most things people say, I think it's just their imagination or wishful thinking. But nowadays, I don't know. I don't know. So when I was in my 20s and nearly married, my spouse and I moved for his job. We needed to find a place to live in pretty quickly, and fate would have it that we lucked into the perfect house. It was old, and in its previous life it had been someone's beach cottage, which I actually loved. What's better than living in a resort town, close enough to walk to the beach, right? Plus, it wasn't in a resort area, it was on the back half of someone's property, with one road in and out, and lots of trees and shade, very quiet, no other people around. It was basically just one big room with a small addition to one side that contained a kitchen and a bath, and another addition off the back that had a bedroom. And the big room was awesome. All windows on 3 sides with a nice breeze most of the time, a fireplace, and lots of open area. And the only thing that really pinged my radar was the landlord. When we rented, he was just overly insistent that we sign a year lease and we couldn't break it for any reason. No matter what, we needed to pay out the lease whether we lived in the house or not. I thought that was a little weird, the way he kept repeating that over and over because he wanted to make absolutely sure that we understood. But it just didn't really register at the time, other than I was a bit worried that maybe there were troublemakers or noisy parties on the beach or something. He assured us, though, that it was a very quiet neighborhood, but he repeated again that we couldn't break the lease. I worked a 9-to-5 job at the time. My spouse worked 12-hour on and off shifts, so there were lots of times when I would be home by myself. The first month or 2 were fine. I liked the house and I liked the neighborhood. I really liked the beach. I'm honestly a homebody, so when the spouse was at work, I would stay at home reading or watching a little TV or cooking and whatnot. I'd always wanted to learn how to knit anyway, so I bought some yarn and started teaching myself. But then, sometime around the 3rd month, I just started getting a really strong feeling like someone would be standing behind me while I was reading. You know, like looking over your shoulder type thing. It only happened when I was alone in the house, and only when I was in the main room. Without thinking too much about it, though, I started sitting in places where my back was to the wall or reading in the bedroom. When I went to bed at night, I started closing the door between the bedroom and the rest of the house because I felt safe in the bedroom. Sometimes, though, when I fell asleep in front of the TV late at night, I'd wake up to catch someone standing in front of the fireplace just out of the corner of my eye. I thought that I needed to stop dreaming so much, but I started to stay in the bedroom after dark with the door shut after this. And things started not being where I put them in the big room. I got kind of irritated with my spouse for messing with my stuff. I wasted 5 to 10 minutes almost every day looking for my handbag or my car keys. And then, one day when I came home after work, I found my knitting yarn wrapped and tangled around all the furniture in the big room. And I don't mean just a little bit. I mean the yarn was strung between couches and wrapped around the legs of the chairs. I told myself that my spouse was playing a trick on me, and I just cleaned it up. Then I decided that I wouldn't mention it to him just to see how long it took for him to come clean. He never did, by the way, and I just moved my knitting to the bedroom. My sister came to visit for a long weekend at one point. I gushed so much about our lovely beach house that she came to visit and see the beach. She came for a 4-day weekend. She slept on the pull-out sofa in the big room, and after the first night, she told us that the sofa wasn't very comfortable and she thought that she was coming down with something, so she changed her travel arrangements and she was leaving that afternoon. She seemed agitated too, but she just wouldn't talk about it. A few days after she went home, she called me. She started the conversation with, "I know you don't believe in ghosts and maybe I'm just being stupid." And honestly, my heart just dropped. I thought I was the only one, and I was just being so stoic and pretending that I never saw or heard anything. She went on to tell me that after she went to sleep that night in the big room, noises woke her up in the middle of the night. She thought it was one of us, but no one was there. Then, while she was sitting in the bed looking around, the windows just started opening and closing by themselves. It just kind of went around the room, and one window opened and closed, and then the next one to that, and then the next one, and the next one, and she heard footsteps walking straight towards her, but nobody was there. The footsteps walked right up to the bed where she was sitting, then over the bed, continued across the room, and then through the side door into the kitchen area. She said that she ran out of the front door and spent the rest of the night on the front porch. She came back inside when the sun came up, waited for us to wake up, and made excuses to go home. And obviously, she didn't want to spend another night in that house. She then said to me, "Look, I know you don't want to believe me, and you know what, that's okay, but I'm never sleeping in that house again." I told myself that my sister had always been a little nutty about stuff like that, so knowing that the house was old, she probably just had a very vivid dream. I kept telling myself that, but a few weeks after, just when I'd stopped jumping at every stray noise, I woke up one Sunday morning and went to cook a leisurely breakfast for me and my spouse. And I still don't know how to explain this, but I opened the kitchen cabinets to get the dishes out to start cooking, and all the dishes were rearranged. Not messy, mind you, not tumbled out. They were just all really neat and orderly, but everything was on the wrong shelf. The shelf that normally had glasses now had plates stacked on them, and the shelves that normally had bowls now had glasses on them. My first thought, honestly, was that somebody had been in the house during the night. I checked all the locks, still locked. We didn't know many people, and I couldn't think of anyone who would pull a trick like that. And besides, there was so much stuff moved that no one could do it quietly without disturbing people sleeping in directly the next room. And so I did what any half-crazed, scared-to-crap person would do. I pretended like it just never happened. I pretended that I always kept the glasses on that shelf and there was nothing strange about having all the plates on this shelf. I sure as hell wasn't moving anything back because I didn't want to see what would happen if I did. I cooked breakfast though, and I went on with my day, and later that afternoon, I told my spouse that I wasn't really comfortable in this house anymore, and could we find somewhere else to live. Amazingly enough, my spouse never asked me why. He simply said that was probably a good idea and let's find something quick. And we moved out. We called the landlord after we'd already packed and moved the furniture. He came over and picked up the keys, and he never, not once, asked why we were moving. In fact, he never met our eyes and just kept looking at the ground. We agreed to keep paying the rent until he could find some new tenants. Months later, I actually asked my spouse if he ever felt anything strange in that house, and he said, "Yeah, actually, that wasn't a good house, and I'm glad we moved." And we never talked about it again. So this happened a long time ago when I was just a kid. I was home alone one hot summer evening. My parents were out on business, and I was enjoying the time alone to do whatever I wanted. We lived in a 2-bedroom first-floor apartment at the time. From the front entrance was a hall that opened into the kitchen. To the left at the far end of the kitchen was my room, and to the right of the kitchen was the living room, which connected to a small den. My parents' bedroom was also connected to the living room off to the right. It was around 9 p.m. when I'd finished dinner and began my nightly routine of taking out the trash, brushing my teeth, and just shutting down for the night. Before retreating into my room, I opened all the windows in the kitchen and living room so that the house would cool down over the night. The windows were all barred, so I wasn't too worried about any funny business happening. I'm a little bit of a security freak, so all the doors in the house have locks, including my bedroom and the bathroom. I eventually shut off all the lights, and I went to my room to watch some TV. I would say that at around midnight, I think I dozed off. I had a really weird dream too, or rather a nightmare, of someone knocking on my door with the knocking getting progressively louder. And it was odd because in the dream, I was laying in my bed, but I just couldn't move. The knocking got so blaringly loud until I just couldn't stand it, and then I heard a scream and I woke up. My heart was racing and I was sweating a little, but there was no damage done. I looked around my room and glanced at my alarm, which read 4 a.m. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I brushed the dream off and I laid back down. I closed my eyes and then suddenly heard knocking on my actual bedroom door. A little delirious, I thought that I'd slipped back into my nightmare, but my eyes shot wide open and I sat up and stared at my door trying to listen. And then there were 3 slow knocks that followed. My first thought was that my parents were back early with food or something, and they wanted me to have some. My dad was notorious for knocking on my door when he got home late at night to check on me, sometimes without calling my name first as well. I always told him that it spooked me and he should announce himself when he knocks, but he always forgets. So I got up and began walking towards the door, but something just felt wrong. When my parents come home, there's usually commotion. They might be having a conversation, or I can hear their keys jingling, my mum's heels, footsteps, or something. This time, though, it was just dead silent. I stopped halfway to the door and I called out, "Who is it?" There was no answer. I opened my mouth to call out again, but before I could get the first word out, there were several rapid knocks on the door. Very persistent knocks, as if it was an emergency and whoever was on the other side needed to get in now. I felt a lump in my throat and my mind was racing, and the first thing I thought of was that it must have been my dad on the other side and he's in trouble. But what if he's choking and can't speak? What if he needs my help? I was frozen in place and couldn't move, and I said, "Who is it?" once more. And again, nothing. "Please say something. Please tell me who it is. It's not funny," I said. A few moments of silence went by, when suddenly it was as if someone threw their whole weight into the door. Rapid, loud bangs began attacking the door, kicks and punches. It was as if there were 3 people on the other side trying to bang the door down. It was so loud that I just started crying, and I found myself jumping backwards and crawling to the corner of my room. The violent banging went on for a few more moments, and then just silence. I sat in the corner frozen. My hands were covering my mouth and tears were rolling down my cheeks. I thought that this was the end. I was shocked the door still stood, because when I heard the first bang, I thought the frame would come crashing down and whatever was on the other side would instantly enter and just end me. I sat there for a period of time that felt like an eternity, and suddenly I heard a clinking, the sound of metal brushing into each other. I knew whatever was on the other side was going through the silverware drawer, and if my life didn't end already, this was my last chance, because I wouldn't get another one. So I sprang up and climbed onto my dresser sitting against my window. I threw open the curtain and shoved the window down, climbed out as quietly as I could. I fell to the sidewalk and ran to the police station down the road. I was hysterical, and I told them what had occurred. That night, my parents were called and they did an investigation of the house. The only things out of place were a cigarette butt left at the base of my bedroom door and my butter knife on the kitchen table. In the following months, we moved out of that apartment, and thankfully, I can say that was the most excitement that I'd ever been through. I soon went to college and graduated, moved to a new state with my family nearby, and life is thankfully continuing as normal. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.